Welcome to Chapter 2. Something I forgot to include on the last video was this practice looking at spelling errors and the consonants. So let's use what we learned in the last video about the consonants and their distinctive features, and let's see if we can analyze what's happening in the student's head with their spelling patterns. So here we have path, and the word has P-A-T-H, but this student spelt it with a P-A-F. So if we break each of the sounds up, we can identify that the F is where the error has occurred for that spelling. Now, knowing what you know about F and TH, the problem is with a substitution of that fricative. That means they are not clear on the articulation of that sound. They are using their tongue in between their teeth as opposed to their teeth on their lips. So you will need to go back and reteach the articulation for those two sounds to help them distinguish that, nope, this is a th sound and not an F sound. Now looking at the word bed, they have MD representing that word. Now, the omission of the vowel sound is an issue we'll talk about in a little bit, but the main error that we see with consonants is the M and the B. Now, this is articulated the same way with their lips together, but they have the type of sound incorrectly. They have replaced the stop with a nasal. So, reteaching the type of sound and how it's made to hear the distinction between the two. Now, looking back at the vowel sound, there's probably some work that the student needs to have with phonological development as well, being able to segment those individual sounds. So that would come into, let's teach the vowel qualities of that E and its distinct features so they can hear that sound separate from the M and the D. Now, if we look at much, they have replaced the CH with an SH. So that again is a type of sound reteach. They have replaced that fricative for an affricate, so they're missing the idea of there's a stop onto that CH. You have uncle, which when you look closely, what they're doing is they are separating the N and G from uncle instead of realizing that there is an which is different than the N sound, and that they have superimposed that voicing from the N onto the unvoiced k. Now, if we say uncle, you still have a k sound, but as they were sounding things out, they've let those two blend together too much with that idea that your tongue is back there for the NG as well. So this one is a little bit more of a complicated reteach because they do have a voiced stop. That is the G and the K in place of an unvoiced stop. So normally you would think that it would just be a matter of turn your voice on, turn your voice off. But you do need to bring attention to what the N is doing and what that actually is happening there, and how the N is moving back through the nasal, back down to the top inside your mouth, and you are going to have some connections between that NG. Those are very closely related. So that discussion might need to happen as well about that co-articulation influence. Now with mop, the replacement has been a stop. It has replaced a voiced for an unvoiced stop. So you need to talk about the unvoiced and voiced options of those words again with that vocal cord reteach. Have them put their hand on their throat to feel that vibration. For athlete, you're looking at the F and the TH, problem again, which again is the articulation focus to, it's not athlete, it's athlete. Again, some focus on what is being done there with their mouth and how there is not an L shape coming from the back of their teeth to in their teeth on their lips. You might need to have an articulation focus of what their tongue is actually doing in that movement from an A to a th. Then you have spinach. The error with spinach is right back here again with your voiced and unvoiced options between those fricatives. Actually, those were affricates. And then you have plan and crayon, and this is a liquid substitution. And so again, you're going to want to focus on that articulation of where the placement of the tongue is with the L and the R, and that's where the differences come in. So each one of these spelling errors is focused on their phonological and phonemic understanding of words. Can they pull apart? When they pull apart those sounds, can they isolate those distinctive features of those sounds? And if they can do that, then attaching them to a letter representation is really easy. They'll learn that this is a sound, this is how it feels, this is the letter that goes with it, and the rule that helps distinguish any kind of changes or oddities. So now that we've kind of taken a look at some consonants, let's dive into our vowels. So vowels are the other half of the equation when we're looking at speech sounds. So we want to look at what they are, which are open sounds that are not obstructed like consonants, and you can feel like you can sing them. Now vowels they resonate within your mouth and all around inside your mouth. And there's not a ton of movement as far as hitting and smacking against or friction creating. So you can describe vowels as not creating any kind of restriction or friction. Now you may have some movement with your tongue and your lips because we do have some things called diphthongs that like to move and have multiple parts of our mouth being used. But one of the key features that makes them different is where your tongue is. We label that by the height, the backness, and the roundness of your lips. So the height will be where your tongue is. Is it high at the top of your mouth, middle of your mouth, or low toward the bottom? Backness deals with being in the front of your mouth, right up close to your teeth, or pulled back to where the back of your tongue is kind of going up and down and raised, and you're filling more of the space in the back of your mouth. Now, we also mentioned roundness. This has to deal with your lips and your mouth shape. Some vowels, it really doesn't matter what your lips are showing, but in other vowels, you do have a really important aspect of what shape your mouth happens to be in, and that helps to determine which vowel it is. Now, another feature that we need to pay attention to with vowels is that every single syllable will have a vowel sound. It is the peak of the syllable. You might even go as far as to say that you cannot have a syllable without a vowel sound. One of the ways that we identify syllables is to look for individual vowel sounds, and that will tell you the number of syllables that occur in the word. Another important feature is that this vowel in the syllable can be stressed or unstressed. And we'll talk a little bit more about stress and unstressing certain sounds in later chapters. But offhand, just for reference, stressed gets the power and the emphasis of the word. And so it tends to be a little bit higher in tone than the unstressed syllable. That one will be lower and kind of lazy. We don't put a lot of emphasis or power into that. You might hear a word like ago. Now, the stressed part of that word is go. The unstressed part is They also are extremely influenced by our nasals. Vowels will sometimes change almost altogether when there is a nasal or a liquid nearby. So that is something very important for students to be aware of. They are also tense vowels and lax vowels. Now, traditionally, we have referred to these as long and short. Long vowels and short vowels are terms that really don't apply to English anymore. They were given those terms back in Middle English when people would record the vowel sound that they wanted. And if they wanted to have a long vowel sound, they would actually write multiple letters for that. So it would be I, and that would be long. But short would be one, so they would use a short representation for that. Well, we don't use that kind of distinction in our spelling anymore to distinguish between the long and short vowels, and so it's not going to hurt the students if we keep that terminology because it is so universally accepted. But if we want to be technical about it from our linguist point of view, we have tense vowels, which are when our mouths are tight and different features of our tongue and our lips are tighter, and that makes those long vowel sounds. And when our tongue and our lips are more relaxed, they make more of the short vowel sounds. So we'll call those laxed vowels. And we know that there will be some movement. Now remember, that is different than that restriction we talked about with consonants and that messing with it. Movement is not necessarily messing with the sound. So that's a way I like to distinguish between consonants and vowels for the students, is that you can move, your mouth and tongue can move with vowels, but you're not messing with the sound. So taking a look at the articulation parts where we might see it really does hinder a lot on where the tongue is. This height and this backness are the major factors for vowel sounds. So here I have the sound E as in heed, and your tongue, if you notice, is really forward and very high. As you start to drop down, your tongue will stay, the tip will stay forward, but the tongue will start to drop down toward the bottom and be low, as in had and hod. Your tongue will now start to emphasize its back area a lot more, and that part will start to rise, and the bulk of your tongue will move further back into your mouth. So you have ah, as in hod, and then you have it a little bit raised for that more rounded aw, as in hod, and hood and hood. You'll notice the tongue has pulled back away from the front a little, the tip has, and the back of the tongue, the bulk of the tongue, has really raised to the back of the mouth. Now it is kind of hard to see this from the side view because we never get to see our articulation at the side of our face. So we rely a lot with students on how it feels, how it sounds, and how it feels within our mouth so that they can get that idea of what's happening with their tongue as it's going to its certain places and where the bulk of the tongue is resting. Now we do have vowels that are called monophthongs. Monophthongs are when you have one distinct vowel sound, like ah, I, ah. There isn't any co-articulation kind of messing around. It is one distinct vowel sound. Then you have those lovely little creations called diphthongs. And diphthongs are when you have two or more vowel sounds squished together so tightly and co-articulated so fluidly into each other that really you have one sound now. A good example of this is ow. If you want to break it down at a linguist's level, ow is actually composed of almost 7 different vowels. But they are so fluidly pushed together, we don't teach them as 7 different vowels squished together. Can you imagine if we tried to write all of them in a row? Our ow words would be ginormous. So what we do is we call them their own sound, and it's ow as you're moving from one part of the mouth all the way through to another one. It makes a lot of sense on the vowel valley, so I will show you again how that ow goes up those 7 different vowel sounds. Another one is oi. And so traditionally, those are the two that most people recognize as diphthongs. I argue that a and I and you are also diphthongs because you do have some movement. When you look at a, you're moving from an e, from those two sounds, from an to an e, and it's a very fluid movement. I would be an e, I, and you're moving back up. So again, I probably would lose that argument, but I think some linguists would be on my side. So here we have the vowel valley. So let's go back to those diphthongs that we were talking about before. We're starting here at the beginning of an ah. So if you look at the chart, you are rather here at this ah, kind of in between this short O and short U, and you're moving up to this ow, ooh, all the way up here. So you're moving through all of those in order to get to that ow. Now, oi is starting back here at this O and moving all the way back up to this E. So it is actually passing through even more vowel sounds as you are moving your tongue up and toward the E sound. The vowel valley is structured like what's happening to your tongue. You start with your tongue high in front, And as you drop the tongue down toward the bottom, you end up here at that octopus, which is low front. And then your bulk of your tongue starts to move back until you get to that high back, like with you and oo. So this is a good model representation of what your tongue is actually doing as it's starting high, dropping down, and moving back to the high. Now, of course, we have some oddballs, such as the schwa. The schwa occurs in those unstressed syllables, and it's rather lazy, so we have a lot of different letters that can be represented by, or the schwa can be represented by, but it's that really short, very small jaw drop, and it's very similar to that short U, but you don't open your mouth nearly as wide as what you see in the picture. It's just really, and it has no energy, and it's very, very unstressed. Now you have your R controlled, and on most vowel valleys, you'll have the the or, and the R. On others, you might have the ear and the R, which of course is two vowel sounds coming together, but since they tend to be tricky and the R is incredibly influential, sometimes it's helpful just to keep them together as it's a vowel pattern that they'll hear in certain words, and then you can focus on the spellings for that. Something interesting to note about the is if you remember back in the consonant chart when we were talking about the R sound, where your tongue was right behind your teeth, a little bit on your soft palate, not touching your teeth like the L sound, but slightly back for the R. That is different than the now has your mouth open and your tongue has actually dropped back a little bit, and the sides of your tongue are touching the back of your teeth. So you're kind of flailing your tongue out a little bit in order to make more of that rounded sound as opposed to the r. A little bit of a difference there, but it can make a big difference when it comes to helping the students recognize when they need to have the and when they need to have the r, just like in a rooster. Okay, so when you teach from this chart, that's something you want to point out to them, is that direction of that movement of the tongue. So let's head off to schwa. Schwa is one of our favorite little friends. That slight sound, that's the jaw drops down a little less, like in banana. It is unstressed, so I like to tell the students that the vowels feel lazy or they're unstressed. They're just chilling out, kind of sleepy. Now you can use an A, an E, an I, or an O for schwa, but it's going to show up in those unaccented or unstressed syllables. Now, it is important to note that you do have a slight variation of the schwa, as from being not so much of an but more of a slight I, and it's a very lazy I. The hard thing about that, and telling differences between there, is that you still have a slight with it. I'll give you an example as soon as I can think of one and try to point that out. Now, looking at some words that have schwa in them. Oh, here's one, tonsil. There you go. Ago, bacon, camel, and tonsil. So since we were talking about that I being a slight it's like an on tonsil. So it's like tons, You almost hear the tonsil, It's a little different than ago, which has a definite Bacon can also be a little bit of the bacon, depending on how you say it, what your accent is from. And camel is definitely more of the So see if I'm going to say those words again and see if you can hear that definite schwa and the slight on the where you have that schwa So we have ago, tonsil, bacon, camel. You can almost hear an I. That's why some students will spell that with an E or an I. Now, some of you might be asking, well, how in the world am I supposed to know what the unstressed syllable is and why it's not just going to be a U? Well, there's a fun trick you can use called calling the dog. Pretend the word is your dog's name, and you're going to holler out the door to call it in for whatever. Or you could even do a child, and maybe it's your child's name, and you're hollering out the door saying, hey, come to dinner. So you take the word and the part that is stretched out is going to be the accented part. So if I say a go, I'm calling my dog. Is the short part, go is the long part, it's the stressed part. Was short, it's the schwa. So if his name was Bacon, bacon. Bay is the stressed, kun is the unstressed. Now my little dog's name is Chester, so if I was calling him, I'd say Chester. The schwa is on the All right, try that trick out and see if that helps you out. Sometimes some students still have a hard time, so you can talk to them about your voice being slightly higher and lower. If you just talk normally, bacon, you can hear my bay is high, a, and my kun, it comes down, bacon. My voice drops. Sometimes it's tricky for students to hear, so calling the dog is a really fun one. All right, let's go to bossy R. Now, these are the R-controlled vowels, or vowel plus R is what I've also heard them referred to. And we are familiar with the fact that the R is so strong that it's going to overpower the initial sound and alter it so much that we consider them its own vowel sound. So here are the three basics that we know and love: and R and or. Now, some fun things to know about these patterns is there's really not some hard and fast spelling rules that say you will only use here, or you only use IR here, or you are here. But when we start to look at spelling guidelines in Chapter 3, we'll talk about some helpful hints that you can give students to, like, this is the one you want to try first. This is what you want to try first. Right now, they're most common IR, in the middle, but ER does show up. And you have these oddities where EAR is going to be as well. But we'll get more into those actual guidelines and spelling rules come Chapter 3. R is pretty straightforward. There's only one spelling for that one. And or is has two, and there is a reason why there's ORE is used. And again, we'll get into that in Chapter 3. It's important to notice that you have R is starting with an that goes right into that sound, which some people ask, well, then why is it an A? Because an A would be and not an ah. Ah would be more of an O. And I don't know. They just chose that, I guess, for it. But I was trying to think of if you have R, you do have that and that really close together on the vowel valley. And so that may just be where it has twisted that sound so much. Or is the least of those that are influenced by the R. You can really hear the O before you get to the R. Okay. So now let's take a quick peek at those two extra ones that are really diphthongs at this point, because you are taking two phonemes and squishing them together. The R is just extremely bossy still. So you have air, and you have ear. So again, we're not restricting the sound in any way, but we are moving from an E to an sound. So you're pulling your tongue back. That's why sometimes it's easier just to help them see that as like a diphthong so that they know that there's multiple sounds there as they're moving. Now, the more common bossy R's like R, and or should definitely be taught a lot sooner than these guys. These guys should come in later, and once they have a good establishment of what those vowel-controlled R's are, or R-controlled vowels are. Now, something fun is when you have a vowel consonant E pattern, this R is not going to be in charge. And so you will not have your R-controlled vowel sound. You should have your long vowel sound. But we have things like here and hair. You still have your long vowel coming in. So there's some argument of like, well, is this truly then this bossy R with this movement, or is that just the fact that R is coming in and you still have this silent E? That's a good discussion. Maybe that's something we put on the discussion board and talk about. Okay, let's look at some more oddballs. These are our diphthongs. So we've got that movement between many, many vowels, and we're going to represent it by one combination and one grapheme set because you glide through those so fluidly, so much. Like if there were vowels that we called liquids, I would think the diphthongs would be liquids. So we have ow and oi. Those ones we're all pretty familiar with. Now, the fun thing about oi and ow, you have a couple of guidelines that help with knowing when to use what. OY and OW will be most likely at the end of a syllable for their sounds, and OU and OI will be most likely in the middle or the beginning. So that's the placement you kind of want to gear kids towards. Now, again, I was talking earlier about how these, I feel, follow the characteristics of a diphthong, but we usually don't teach them as diphthongs, and that would be A, I, and U. If you think about what's happening with your mouth, you start with an E, A. You go from an to an E sound. Over on I, you start with an an ah to an E, I. And if you look at unicorn, you actually start with a y, oo, you. So remember when we were trying to identify phonemes back in the last section? This is why I really think you is a diphthong, because you are having that slight y on there and you're moving over into the oo. You're crossing over consonant to vowel in this one. So I think if it isn't a diphthong, it should be something of its own. Now, on the vowel valley, you have those inside of the vowel valley. The diphthongs usually are in their own section because they pass through so many. Maybe one of the reasons why these guys are isolated as diphthongs on their own is because they pass through so many. It's 7 to 11, how many? And the I and A only really pass through 2 or 3. I don't know. That's my guess. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we are going to separate these words into their vowel sounds. Rule. Rule. If we think about that, that's a ooh sound. Ooh. So we're not having a long U as a U because that Y is not allowed to come right after the R. So when the R is in front of this pattern, you end up with an ooh sound instead. So we're going to be over here in the ooh box. Now let's look at boy. The vowel sound B, oi. Yep, should be right down here in the oi. Type, T, I. Yep, we're looking at long I. Steak will have that long A sound. His has that short I. Friend has that short E. Let's take a look at this next row. Where do you guys think that these words will go? We have push, gym, heart, boat, laugh, no. Take a minute and see. Go ahead and put those into the boxes that you think they'll be in. Okay, hopefully you paused if you needed more time. So let's check them. Let's put push in the gym goes in that short I, heart goes over in the R box, boat is a long O, we have laugh is an A, we have no is also a long O. So if you need to, go ahead and push pause on the video so you can finish all the sorting. I'm going to go ahead and go through the rest of them now and put them into the box. So this is pause. Okay, hopefully now you've unpaused and you had a chance to fill all those out, and let's check your answers. So we have up, short U, bot is the ah, odd is short O, threat is the short E, peace is a long E, void is an oi, use has that long U, use, you can hear that U on it, bounce is an ow, way is a long A, search is that latch is an burn is also an boot is I like to say long double O or the oo sound. Prow is a ow. View is also the one that has that U on the front of that long U. So think about that as you break it up. You almost have that slight yet there. Pour is the or sound. Foot has that Car has R. Love is an Walk goes with that ah, that further back ah that's more resonating in the back of your mouth. Cease is a long E. Palm is that front ah. High is a long I, and scorch is an OR. Now, did any of those surprise you? If you have questions, please let me know about which ones you weren't sure of. Now, a little fun FYI is take a look at the word love. A lot of teachers teach this one as a heart word or a sight word when it truly isn't. This is an example of a graphotactic rule that says in English language you are not allowed to end a word in V. So this silent E is just a placeholder for graphemes. It has nothing to do with the sound. It's just being held there to show that we are not ending a word in the letter V, and the sound is not affected by that at all. So once students understand that rule about V, they are able to handle words like love and have and gave. Well, gave does follow the rule. That one, it does have an influence. So of course you're going to have that rule breaker there and say this one does affect the sound, but it's still, the E is still there for that no V at the end of a word for English. Okay, so now let's take a look at the spelling errors that we have, especially for vowels. So if the word was foot and the student spelt it with an F-O-T-E, looking at that error, that's right there at the O spelling and the So what the problem is that they're confusing where that vowel is being produced with the tongue being back and round. So they need to work on their mouth shape, going from an O to an pulling their tongue back and making their lips just a little bit more relaxed and open. So then we have hug, which they've used hog and OG. So the error is right there at that ah and that And what's happening is that they're confusing their low middle vowels. So their tongue position is in the wrong place. Ah has your tongue low front, has your tongue pulled back. So they need to learn how to pull their tongue back a little bit more in order to produce and hear that sound. Now we have leg and lag. So the error is right here on that eh. This one again is a confusion of your mid, front, and your laxed vowel position. So you're talking about your mouth being relaxed. Your tongue position for the and the is different. Your tongue drops for the and almost makes a bowl with its shape. And your mouth has to open a little bit more. So a little bit more attention to how much more that needs to open for those two different sounds. Then you have smart, and they're replacing the AR with an OR. This is a confusion of a vowel and R combination that you're actually starting with an O instead, or sorry, you're starting with an R instead of an O sound. So again, it's an articulation issue about which particular point you're starting with those R controlled. Then you have caught, which they're spelling with just an O. And this one, besides not knowing that this is the spelling pattern for the ah sound, this one is where you're pulling your tongue back and resonating, so that tongue and backness. Ah, the short O, is really up front and your sound doesn't resonate. It stays right there in the front of your lips. But when you go to that ah, as in caught, you're pulling the sound back with your tongue, and your tongue is going back where you're resonating toward the back of your mouth actually opens a little bit more. So if you say pot, where it's really, you feel it really close up front, but if you say caught, you feel it pull back and your mouth should open up almost like you're yawning. Then we have the most infamous one. This is one teachers talk about students doing all the time, and that is where you're replacing the I with an E or vice versa. And this one again is related to where that sound is occurring, your mouth shape and your tongue placement, even your tongue shape. So if we have an and an has your tongue higher. And I like to tell the students to crinkle their nose a little bit because your tongue is high. You get to push your nose up and make an almost like that's gross. And the has your mouth open more, your tongue is dropped, and this again is where you have that little bowl shape with your tongue. I like to tell kids, I go, you can stick your tongue out a little bit, and that's the difference. Paying attention to that articulation will allow them to attend to that sound. So when you say pen, they watch for their tongue sticking out. When they say pin, they watch for their nose to crinkle up a little bit. They'll start to feel that difference between those two. But don't worry too much if they still find that being a little bit tricky, because and are very close to each other on the vowel valley, and so it makes sense that those would be very easily confused. Okay, so now let's take this word sort with these vowel phonemes. So take a few minutes, go ahead and pause the video, try out the word sorts for these oo, and u. Then try the word sorts for the the and then this back ah, and the So there's a slight difference between each of these. These are the ones that are very confusable. Students have a hard time sometimes distinguishing between these sounds. And let's see how you do. Okay, so hopefully you paused and filled out all your answers. So let's check. For the oo and u, the word moo and q should be split between the two. So let's take a look as we go. How are you doing? Did you get the right ones into the right box so far? I think it's interesting to note on mute. Remember that it's like the long U with a ute, but watch what happens when we exchange that M for an if it is in the same place or not. If any of you have a question about these, please let me know of why this is in a box and why it is not in a box. Okay, so now cute is in the wrong place. Cute should be up here in the long U. I don't know what happened there. So if we look at that rude and we look at that fume, most of the time the long U sound with that slight y on the front of it is our pattern of U consonant E. But when you have an R, when you have an starting it, you can still use that pattern, but it will not make that long U sound. And that's because a phonotactic rule states that we cannot have that and a slight y in front of it. It ends up being something like reude. And I've often seen students try to put like a silent E or a schwa or a Y in there. And one student spelled R-E-Y-U-D-E because when he was spreading it out, he was trying to make the reude, and it was like, no, it doesn't work. So it's just a r, and you have to change the sound to ood. In English, that's the only sound we permit to come after that sound. Now we still use that pattern for various reasons as a consonant, vowel consonant E, but that's the sound constraint that comes with that. So make sure students are aware of that. So when you're focusing on that spelling pattern, you can let them know that, yeah, this isn't going to make that same sound because in English it's not allowed. Now, if we come down to this bottom one, let's start taking a look there of the difference between that front, very front ah, low front ah, and that back resonating in the back of your mouth ah. Do you notice any similarities between which ones are going in that front short U and which ones are going further back? Do you notice any differences when we get to the short, sorry, that was a short O before, when we get to the short U as when we get to the short W? Any spelling patterns do you notice? What about sounds that precede or follow it? Any kind of tried and true little hints that we might be able to pull from of why it's an back ah instead of a front ah? I'll go through the rest of them as you're checking through the words and seeing where they fit up. Now, something I did notice just now about the short U is that you have a lot of stops. And you do have a fricative with father. It's a voiced fricative. You have a lot of stops that follow that short ah. Swat, frog, walk, talk, father. And this one is a little bit more abrupt than the unvoiced th. So I found that interesting. But if you look over here, this one you have ought, but you have a longer stretch out here. I think that might just be to represent the fact that it's not the short U. You have a stop there. You have a liquid following it here. You have a glide following it here. A liquid, a fricative, a nasal, and then you have that long stretched out silent GH with a T. So I'm wondering if we could draw any conclusions based on what kind of sound is following that makes it different between the short U and the long ah. If you have any thoughts, go ahead and text me and let me know. I'm going to hesitate from making some solid conclusions here, but that might be something for an interesting discussion for later. Okay, so let's take and look at some more. Go ahead and pause the video for now and go ahead and sort those out into your ow, your your ah, your ah, your no, that was so oo, and this is Then you have your These are so slight. It's so hard to get them nice and clear on the computer. I'm going to try one more time. You have ow, you have oo, aw, ah, and you. Down here is r, and or. Okay, so now that you've had a chance to pause and to sort those out, let's go ahead and see where they fall. You guys can check it and take a look. Again, word sorts are a wonderful way for students and a teacher to help guide and see where the patterns might occur, where you might see some guidelines. Now, as we know with English, we cannot say they're hard and fast rules because we incorporate so many different languages within our own English language and so many influences that we're going to have some exceptions. But sometimes we can find some commonalities that act as a guideline. So let's see if we can see any of those. In our ah again, we have a liquid after the ah sound, a liquid, L after the ah, a W glide after the ah. Now that some may argue that's part of the spelling, which may be part of that, but other people may argue that the reason why we're spelling that is that we have to think of our glide that opens our mouth and pulls things back into our back of our mouth. That would be the reason why they used the W, to kind of force your idea of pulling your mouth back to that before you hit the stop. So we start to realize, maybe there could be a reason why we chose an AW when we think about the movement of our mouth. Maybe there is a reason why we chose certain kinds of spellings to get our mouths to kind of almost prep for that, but not actually quite make the sound. Now with this frontal ah, we have an AL, and a nasal. That is an interesting conundrum when we think about what happened on the previous exercise. A lot of these can be influenced by dialect. So some of you are wondering, well, I put that one here and I put that one there. Dialect does come into play. So again, we love English. It can sometimes be helpful or not. Let's take a look at the r, and or. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to have a discussion. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail in this presentation here, but I want to open that question up into discussing it on the discussion board and in person. So taking a look at where these fall, these ones are a lot easier to sort because their sounds are a lot more distinct. There's a big difference between r, and or. Now, as you're teaching students, it's important to note some things about, especially these ones up here that are confusable. You do not want to teach these in the same week. Now, and or, you have a little bit more leeway. These ones are different enough that it wouldn't be a horrible deal to have them within the same week. But can you imagine trying to have the tough discussions with your students that we're having with these top ones in the same week if you taught AW and short U at the same time? Or if you did this as in bush and as in flood, if you tried to do those in the same week, how confusing that would be. And I think that's mostly the message that she's sending here, is really be purposeful about when and what order you're going to be teaching these sounds. And are you really certain and sure that you want to put that many sounds together within a week? Now, as we know, curriculums are awful. They do that so much, and they'll try to put so many multiple sounds together, and some of them that are super closely related, and the kids get confused and they struggle. So that's just a little penny thought there as you're going through and planning. Think about that. Okay, so now let's talk about minimal pairs. In the actual chapter part, we didn't really discuss a lot about minimal pairs because it is pretty straightforward. We're going to take two words and we're going to have everything else in the word be the same except one sound, because we want them to start to see patterns and letter sound combination patterns or sound combination patterns, and we're just changing one element so that they can focus on the new element or the different element. So let's take a look at paw. Here we have paw, which is that front vowel ah, and then paw, which is that back vowel ah. So if you say that, paw, paw, If you listen carefully, can you hear the slight difference between that short O, ah, and that back resonating ah, almost the yawn? We could describe that they're both in the middle, they're both low, but that AW ah is more rounded. It pulls it back and to resonate into your mouth. So we try to think, okay, what's another pair that would show that similar characteristic? Talk and talk. Talk as in tick-tock is very front, short U. Talk pulls it back. All right, let's take a look at put and put. Here we have both in the middle. Your tongue's both in the middle, and they're both back. Again, that from put is more rounded. You have put, put. You have more of an on put. I think I have those backwards. No, I think I have these symbols backwards. Sorry, I'll have to fix that because you have put and put. This one should be the short U, and this one right here should be that short double O. It's almost like an where your lips kind of poke out a little bit. So another pair would be buck and book. Again, you see that the sound is the same. The spelling may be a little different. The focus is that you have everything the same except one sound. So that means the other sounds are the same. All right, let's take a look at the next one. We have slid and sled. Yep, it's those vowels eh and again. Remember that the eh is lower. They're both in the front. The I is higher. That's why the whole sticking your tongue and curling it for an eh and crinkling your nose for an I is helpful for kids to start to feel that better. Soot and suit. Difference between and oo. They're both in the back. They're both rounded. But oo is higher, your tongue raises, and you're tense. It gets tighter. That's why I like to refer to this as the long double O, and this is the short double O. All right, then we have food and feud. If you're paying attention, there are other minimal pairs popping up there. You could have had a different example over there if you want to. These are just the ones that I pulled out. So food and feud, again, they're both high, they're both toward the back, and they are both tense. The difference with the feud is that you have that long U with that slight y, and it's glided. That Y makes that part like almost a partial glide. Remember back in consonants when we talked about the Y is considered a semi-vowel because it's often part of a vowel sound? This is a perfect example of that. So then we have shot and shut. You have a frontal ah, and your tongue will move back to the but they are both in the middle and they're both low. They're both laxed. Now, is a step less open. So if you go ah and your mouth is in a rounded shape up front, the slightly closes that. Ah. You feel your jaw change just a little bit. So that's the benefit of looking at minimal pairs is you can take some of these sounds that are close together, that are tricky, and feel that slight difference as you're moving back and forth because all the other sounds are the same. Now, we did talk about schwa a bit, and remember when we called the dog in order to find out which one is unaccented? Well, now you're going to take all these parts, you're going to piece them together and try to match up and make a word with these syllables. So go ahead and hit pause again, and then we'll come back and check. Okay, so let's take these and match them up. I can go fal and kun. I can have the kun is where the schwa is at. Remember, if we call the dog, it's falcon. This is actually turning into that slight I. Remember, we have schwa can be a definite but it's lower and quieter and not any stress. And you would actually make it a slight I, falcon. All right, let's try cactus. So cactus, cactus. If you have more of that slight your voice drops. Get really small movement. Don't let your jaw move very much on the us. Yep, that's our schwa. Okay, we have sudden. Where's the schwa? Good, it's on the dun. Our next one can be bottom. Where's the schwa? Right. Is anybody noticing a pattern where most of our schwas occur? Hopefully you'll see something start to occur. Here's happen. Schwa is on the pen. Trumpet. Schwa is on the pet. Fragment. Fragment. It's a slight I, short I. Fragment. Sounds like M-I-N-T is what it really sounds like. It's at the end. So hopefully what you started to notice is predominantly in the English language, we unaccent the second syllable. That happens so often. Now, we know it's not always the case. You have a go and again. Those have it on the first syllable, but predominantly you're going to see it occur on the second syllable a lot. So we have lesson, second syllable, blossom, second syllable, tunnel, same, hammock is the same, written, same, slimmest, same, and gladdest. Good. Now I'm going to ask an extra bonus. Can you tell which one has that slight or which one has the slight I for the schwa? If you said written, nice job. Tunnel has a slight I is on written. Lesson, good, that's another I. So we can talk more about that in the discussion group. You can add up some ideas or some questions you have there as well. Okay, so now that we've been looking at the vowels and we took a deeper look at the consonants, we want to know, what does this look like? What in the world, how does this fit? This is so new. All of this attention to the articulation, paying attention to how it's formed, that's not in our curriculum. And I have yet to see a curriculum that has any of this in it. So how does that fit? Where does that go into our day? There are several options for this, and that's something that we on an individual basis can talk about and kind of look to see how it would fit with your practice. But some general suggestions are, let's grab the kid lips. This is where, as you're introducing the sound, you take your instructional guide from your manual that talks about the articulation, pinpoints certain locations of the sound, and you get to see it in action. Now, I have several examples of lessons that I can show you on a one-on-one basis where we actually use some of this and have some visual supports for the students. Inside of your Kidlip manual, you have every sound on 2 pages. So you have special notes for you, which gives you some information, gives you information about the placement of your tongue. So all of those things when I was talking about, well, here's your tongue does this, and this is your, and then it moves and it vibrates. All of that knowledge is right here for you. This you wouldn't necessarily read to kids, and you may or may not need to share some of this. But having a knowledge of this for you is important because then you can key into what the student is doing. Now, tips to apply, these are some helpful hints. Like if the student's native language doesn't have that sound, here's some helpful hints for you. Or when you're choosing words or working with words orally and not in written form, different things that is going to help it be more successful as you're teaching these. Now, on the right, in the blue, this is what you actually say to students. So some teachers like to have a script and say, well, how do I describe this? How do I put this in kid-friendly terms? Well, that's what this manual does, is it gives you those kid-friendly terms. Now, you don't have to read this word for word. If you had an aide that you wanted them to work with a student again on this in a small group, or you wanted them to be able to hear it again and practice it again, I would give the aide this and ask the aide to read this. You, though, as the teacher with your knowledge background here and your understanding, you can summarize this and make this in a way that your students can understand it. Use it as a guideline so you can say, okay, this is how we do the I do, the we do, and the you do. My favorite part is down here at the bottom after you get through this kind of script is that it gives you some examples of the sound in different locations in the word. And I really, really like to check my students' understanding and ask them first if they can hear the sound. Give me a thumbs up if the sound is in the word or a thumbs down if it's not. And I'll mix some other words in there that don't have the sound. And then I'll bring up some words and say, where is the sound? Is it at the beginning? I have them put their hands on their head. Is it in the middle? I have them put their hands on their hips. And if it's at the end, I have them squat down on the carpet so they can tell me it's beginning, middle, or end, giving them a chance to recognize where the sound occurs. And that's going to be a wonderful scaffold to prepare them for your graphotactic rules that we'll be talking more about in chapter 4 and 3. It's kind of a combo 4 and 3. Okay, that is the end. I hope that you got a lot of information, and don't forget to post your questions. I will see you again in chapter 3.